All right, I've got another hobby update for the week. Last week I recorded a hobby update on Saturday morning. Today I'm doing that a little early. I'm doing it Friday night. I don't really expect to get too much done later tonight. And part of that is because I had a productive enough couple of weeks that I'm running out of supplies. I've emptied 2 of the tubs of the Vallejo basing gel, and I've run out of Kings of War regiment bases. I've got the Ironheart Designs one I typically like to use. So I need to put in another order with them before I can really continue finished work on any of these projects, but I'll continue to assemble and paint along the way. So a mix of things to show here. Let's start with the ones closest to hand. So last week I talked about the start of a new Roman project. I've continued on with that. This is a project that is really around taking models I already have that I've had sitting collecting dust for many, many years, and finish up the paint enough to get them on the table, base them up, and use them for Kings of War into the Strongest. Here are a couple of units that can be fielded separately as light troops of archers, or brought together as a larger unit of bowmen. Some of these, I think about 6 of them, were previously painted, and all I did was add some highlights for some of the brighter colors, just to make them pop a little bit more. I still likely will run a dry brush over some of this chainmail to brighten it up like I've done on this front unit, but I haven't finished it yet. One of the things of note for this project is I am using a new flower company. I'm not sure I love them yet. It's Geek Gaming Scenics, cool YouTuber. It seems like a really great and cool guy. These flowers, I believe, are tulips, or no, sorry, daffodils. So they're a little different than some of the other flower products I have. They're a mess. They fall apart pretty easily, and I don't know how durable they're going to be in the long term. That said, I have not hit them with dull coat yet. I was actually waiting for this video before I'm going to dull coat anything. I had a little piece of aquarium clip off. I clipped that off of a piece of aquarium terrain. Just add a little bit of something on the base. So more along the lines of that project, I have these I finished basing last night. I've got 3 scorpions. I'm going to use these as scorpions, of course, but in Kings of War, I'm going to use them as dwarven organ guns or cannons for Kingdoms of Men, depending on what I'm fielding the armies as. I also have a Optio and a Signifer, as, you know, whatever characters I need in the moment. These were not painted, and I decided to just give them the speed paint treatment. These, like the others, were about, you know, average around 7 to 8 minutes per model, including every single stage, including basing. So quite fast. Not as fast as my initial goals, but good enough for this project. I'll have the Romans done pretty soon. Moving on to the next thing in Reach. I've been trying to get through all of the different miniatures I have sitting in boxes and get them on the table, play with them, and get some paint on them. So a game that I've played a few times and have really enjoyed is the Cool Mini or Not, A Song of Ice and Fire game. So here's a unit of Starks that I decided to speed paint testing out this time the new Army Painter line of speed paints. Forgive me, I always forget the names of products. The box is right here. It is the Speed Paint Starter Kit. And I restricted myself to the use of this and then a little bit more for highlights. But I ran their version of gray, it's called Gravelord Gray, as the base for metal. They're blue, they're white, they're not they're white, they're kind of a skeleton bone color. I used their brownish color as the base for gold. And then I ran highlights over these things. Now, the starter kit didn't come with a white, so I used Citadel Contrast for the white. And I've really had great experience with Citadel White. But for the time I spent on these, and for these ones, it was actually even a quicker job than the Romans. I'm happy with them. I'll have a fully painted Stark army on the table sometime in the somewhat near future. A couple of small items to finish off parts of my 10mm collection. When I first started collecting 10mm, a 40mm square was considered a full unit. Right? We used a standard frontage of 40mm, and that would be a unit. And it would only be a horde or larger where you'd go to the 80mm frontage. Well, since then, we've changed our standard amongst my group to 80mm is the standard unit. So I still had a few units, and I still do have a few units, and I've got some prime back here, where I only had a 40mm version, and I didn't have the kind of doubled up version to make them fully 80 wide. So I'm going back, and I'm, as much as possible, trying to complete those units, because I've already got them half done. Why not do a little extra work to make them fieldable with the new frontage? So these are meant to be Campanian light cavalry, likely allied with Rome. I can use them as allies in other armies, but they're really for my Romans. They're part of the Socii, I think is what companions would count as in a Roman army. Here we have some Greek light cavalry, but they are so versatile. They can be used for a lot of different things throughout the era. I would primarily be fielding them within my Pyrrhic army or some of my successor armies. The Seleucids would also be able to use them too, and I used a basing component, these yellow flowers here that are common throughout my Seleucid army, just so it like visually fits in as well. Next up, we have a eBay rehabilitation. I bought a pretty moderately priced eBay collection of old Foundry miniatures that were painted to an okay standard. A lot of battle damage, some basing choices that are definitely dated. You know, maybe 20 years old for the most part. But I rebased everything, touched up some of the paint jobs, and I'm working my way through the collection of adding highlights and things like that, just to bring them back to life. And I'm incorporating them because they're Foundry. They're that really small scale of, call it 25 to 28mm that Warlord shares. So it's not really compatible with most ranges, but luckily my Roman collection is all that really small scale, so these fit in nicely. So I have some Balearic Slingers, and I've got 2 bases worth of them. This is an extremely basic paint job, but I mostly left it in place. I highlighted the skin, and I patched up some area where paint had chipped off, but the cloth is mostly in place the way it was before. I think it works fine. It's very simple. I think it's working fine. And basing them to match the rest of the Roman army, just so you can see for reference, they're based the same, and using a lot of flowers, mostly purple and yellow, to kind of tie these units together. And not much else to say here. These are really easy. I did base them a little differently than I do most infantry regiments. They're on a 50mm by 125mm base. The reason why is because for To the Strongest, it doesn't matter. Any base is the same as any base as long as it fits within the grid size you're using. But for Kings of War, my Imperial Romans, and part of this is the joke about the Warlord scale being so off, but my Warlord Romans I'm actually fielding as Imperial Romans. And it works really well because as Imperial Dwarves. Imperial Dwarves in this game have a few things that are particularly like Romans. One is they have access to high defense, of course, but they also have an upgrade that every single infantry fighting troop, with the exception of berserkers, can take, and that is essentially a pilum. They can throw it, and it's armor piercing and does a little damage ahead of the combat. So give a bunch of dwarf regiments that upgrade, and suddenly they're Roman legionnaires. And then there's another unit called Sharpshooters, based on a 50mm by 125mm that are units of essentially trained long-range snipers. Balearic Slingers have that reputation. Whether or not it's true to the game mechanics, maybe it's a little bit of a stretch, but I thought it was a really good use for those models. Move on to something completely different, still Roman. There's a new game coming out next week called Strength and Honor. It is a game that mixes game elements from To the Strongest and Blood Bowl. And it is set in, the end of Republican Rome era to early Principate. So think like first few centuries AD back a century or so BC. So this is a Roman legion. I haven't labeled it yet. This is a spot for a unit label. Why does it look so weird? Well, Strength and Honor is a 2mm scale game. So 2mm, 28mm, pretty big difference. With a paint job like this, you're just trying to evoke what this is. So this is a Roman legion with some cohorts lined up in formation. This is 5,000 or 4,800 men, like something like that, all marching across the ground at this very small scale. These are like little copses of trees and large like hedge and bushes. These aren't like, tiny shrubs like you'd see on a normal size base. I just took some MDF bases that I had lying around and repurposed them for this. Spent a small amount of time adding some dots and dabs of color. It is what it is. I'm really excited to play the game. And this has been a fun, just very different, out of the ordinary project for me. We'll see what it looks like when it's all massed together. But I can say, having lined about 8 of these up on the table, the effect is very nice when you're standing over the table looking at these massive formations fighting against each other. And you certainly don't get that appreciation of looking at one at a time like this. But anyways, finished one of those this week. I have a grand tournament coming up next week, and I will be pulling out for the first time ever in Kings of War, and for the first time many years in any game, my goblins. Here's a goblin hero I'll be bringing to the table for the first time in a very, very long time. I've rebased him to match my Kings of War goblin-themed army, and I'll do a showcase of that pretty soon, maybe before the grand tournament. But as part of this, to update my list, I needed to rebase some models, and I went to my collection of models that I originally painted back around 2006, I think is when most of these were painted. So here's some goblin, what are called rabble or sharp sticks for Kings of War. These were painted, I want to say I painted these in 2007. I painted them as soon as the Skull Pass box came out. Maybe that was 2008, trying to think of exactly when it came out. But a long, long, long time ago, and these have seen many a battle over the years, but none in recent memory. They will be back going to tournaments starting next week. They are now based for Kings of War, and I based them to match my existing Kings of War Orcs and Goblins stuff, which is really, they've taken over a cemetery. So you see like some dead grass and leaves, and you see a lot of stonework on these bases. When I showcase the rest of the army, you'll see that the theme goes a little deeper. Here I have some, I think they're called bang stick Goblin Cavalry. In this case, I'm using Spider Riders. Again, painted in the same batch as those previous models from way back when. I originally painted them for the 2008 Baltimore Grand Tournament and the kind of season leading up to it. That was my first large Warhammer Fantasy tournament. And I've got one more unit that I rebased for this upcoming tournament, and that's Goblin Wolf Riders. I do plan on actually adding some highlights to this guy and touching him up a little. And other than that, I'm somewhat happy with the paint job, considering I painted these so long ago and before I knew half the techniques that I know now, and when I had a very small paint collection, a single brush, you know, I still think they hold up. You can tell they're old, mostly because of the models and partially because of the color choices, but I really like the models. The basing again is to match the rest of that army, and you know, a lot of the other units within the army have like three-dimensional pieces of their bases that are much larger, like you know, active crypts or large walls or toppled statues. These ones are a little more understated because I just needed to get them done for this tournament. All right, a few more units to show, and then we're off for this week. So we have these are rescues. These are Romans that already had base coats on them and then had Army Painter's dark shade applied to them. So they're really dark and dusty looking, a little hard to even tell what they were, but I gave them highlights, new basing, shield transfers, and fixed up some of the assembly problems that they had, like changed some hand positionings to make sense a little more, and did some swaps. And this is what I ended with. These are Imperial Praetorians. Wow, they don't even fit in camera view. And this is for Kings of War, a horde formation. Could be 2 regiments, and for 2 the strongest, it would be 2 units of legionaries. This was fun to do. They've been sitting there gathering dust for so long. It's really nice to know that I'm pretty soon I'll be able to use them. They also have these things. I forget what they're called. Something with an L. I think it's 2-syllable short L word. But they are a Cavalry Trap that's assembled on the move. I've got a lot of stuff like littering the bases, like a little shield that I ripped off a guy recently, stuff like that. And then finally, last thing I did for this past week, and all of this started, everything I've shown started on Saturday night is when I started painting these things. These last ones, some of these were painted last video, about half of them, and the other half I painted throughout the week, and then I based them all and finished the highlighting and stuff like that. These are 2 more units of legionaries. These were unpainted when I got them, but they were assembled, and I timed myself and used this as a speed painting exercise. But all right, that's it for what we finished this week, and this, I point out, this is a chopped up piece of aquarium terrain that I had purchased for a different project and really didn't like it. So I just busted it up and I'm putting it in little bits on different bases, and I think I like it fine for that purpose. And then I have some shields there on the ground from a Celt project where I had rebased and reshielded many of the Celts, and I will show them off in a future video. But I still kept all of the old shields, and they work perfectly as kind of litter on the ground. All right, well, that's it for this week. I'll see you with a hobby update next week, and expect a video on Sunday morning. Thanks, folks.